it stays chilly.
Well, hopefully we
Can you
can
hear me
talk.
okay? Because it looks like the volume's not working. Dr. Bird, good morning.
Good morning. Is it as cold up in Baltimore as it is down here in Southern Maryland? Because wow.
I don't know. I was just talking about it. It's 58 in my office. How's St. Mary's?
It's about 56 in my office. The heat went out over the weekend, and it's funny because we have to move out of the building because they're redoing the HVAC in this old building for the next 6 months. So it's perfect timing since we moved this week.
Yeah, so later on today, my burn barrel, I'll bring it in and start it burning 2x4s.
Secretary, we do have record retention rules, so make sure you're not burning any records. I'm kidding.
No, I know. Hey, Brad, good morning. Okay, do we have anybody from MICUA? Sarah,
Brad, you're on mute.
Okay.
Thanks, Emily.
Yep.
Do we have anyone from Morgan?
Does not look like it. Nor do we have anyone from MICUA. So we're missing MICUA and Morgan.
Oh, I thought I heard someone from MICUA when I asked. Yeah, we'll wait another minute. Hey, Ian, good morning.
Morning.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think it's important that we try to stay on time. The first thing to do is just welcome everyone, and then we have a couple of introductions. Dr. Coleman, if you'd briefly introduce yourself for sitting in for Dr. Bachman this morning.
Good morning, everyone.
I think you know everybody, but it's always nice to be introduced.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. And I hope you've had a good start to your new year. Tony Coleman or Antoinette Coleman, either one, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. I'm sitting in for Dr. Joe Bachman, the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs at USM.
Great, good morning. And I think everyone, Sarah just joined from MICUA. Good morning. Ian Klein, I think everyone knows. So let's go ahead and get started. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from November the 15th?
I'll make a motion.
Do a second. They're great, Dr. Bird. Thank you. Any amendments or edits, suggestions? Morning, Dr. Smertz. Okay, great. Hearing no discussions. All in favor, say aye. Approval. Aye. That was easy, moving right through the order. What we've done, working with Dr. Dow, I asked her to compile all of the reports. Really is like a calendar of reports that seem to be getting longer and more in depth, from the legislators as well as others' expectations. So we thought it'd be better than continuing to send like every other week. It seems like a request for a report, to put a calendar together so we all can see where we are and plan our work. So Dr. Dow.
Sure. Thank you, Secretary Fielder. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I'm working just off my laptop this morning, so you all go away, but let me share my screen. Just as Secretary Fielder said, we've put together a very basic Excel file. And we did this kind of as a draft for this year. What I'd like to suggest is that we send this out as a calendar after legislative session is over and after the JCR book comes out. We will then circulate it out to segment. We will probably continue doing individual memos, but at least at a segment level, you'll have it kind of organized and laid out for all the different reporting requirements. So let me share my screen so you can see what we're talking about. And I would welcome any recommendations on different columns that we should do or any additional information. There is a report number to many of these reports. Sometimes the report number changes, but really the title of the report, in it, we would have a link to either the statutory requirement. You'll see we've also included, like I said, this was for this past year, 2021 JCR requests, so a link to the different JCR. We have some COMAR requirements. So this isn't exhaustive necessarily, but we will, when we get it out to you all, it would be complete. So we have a link, which campuses are involved, whether it's just a particular segment or specific institutions, the due dates for campuses to submit materials to MHEC. And so with an asterisk, it means that that is mandated by statute. If there's no asterisk, it means that we're setting the due date. And then the due date to the General Assembly, same kind of nomenclature. If there's an asterisk, it's mandated by statute or some other requirement. All of these reports that we require information from you all don't necessarily require commission approval. There are other reports that our agency puts out that does need commission approval. So we probably won't include that. And then just some additional notes. So I wanted to run this all by you, see if this format works for you, if you need additional information that would help you as segmental leaders kind of organize and work with your campuses to make sure we get the information when we need it. So let me stop there. Let me stop sharing so I can see you all again. And what do you think of all of that? And how can we make this work for you all so that it's kind of a streamlined process? Sarah.
Thanks, Emily. This is amazing. Very, very appreciative. I have a question about the column that said report number, JCR bill number. So sometimes we run late, you run late, different things get in the way, life gets in the way. Is there a way to indicate which ones of those are hard stops, if any, and which ones, if there's a pandemic again, MHEC has the authority to waive this due date, or you need to talk to the presiding officers if you're going to be submitting late? Because I think that would be helpful for us to going forward. And if it's already on there and I just didn't see it on your screen, I apologize. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we can probably put those comments in the notes column. Let's see where we are in 3-4 months towards the end of spring after session. Yeah, but I think you're right. Depending on context and demands and what's priority, if we're having to pick priorities, we can put that in the notes section for sure. Yeah. Tony.
Yes, Emily, will this just go to us as segmental leaders to disseminate, or will it go to presidents and other people? Because sometimes that gets confusing, and so how will you make this calendar available so that we may tweak it when we send it to institutions?
So my intent right now, but it's open for discussion if you would prefer something different, we would send it to segmental leaders for you all to help just coordinate, because we lean so heavily on you all to disseminate our requests for data. So really this is intended for you all, and I can make sure we send it in an Excel file so that you can manipulate it in a way that works for you all. But that would be the intent, is for you all to then use it as you see fit.
Thank you.
Yep. Brad?
Yeah, Brad, yep.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions along the same lines. And yes, thank you so much for organizing this and putting it together. This is very helpful. My first thoughts were, will you still continue to send out the memos to segments to reach out whenever a report is due as sort of a trigger point as well for us?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that some of these reports that you're asking for are JCR, but some of them are actually statutory. Some of them are annual, some of them are one time only. Are all those distinctions made in your Excel spreadsheet? I just couldn't get a.
Yeah. So that's the thing is I think we'll have to probably do this once a year and highlight ones that are either annual or one time only, or if they are on a every 2 year, every 3 year basis, we'll have to make note of that and find a way to be clear that we're going to leave this report on the calendar, but it's not a reporting year. Or we're leaving it on the calendar, but we don't have to, because some of those JCR requests you report 2 years out. You're not reporting that year. So we'll have to make note of that. We'll put it on the segmental agenda before we release it so we can walk through each report. But that way, I think this will help all of us get organized. I will admit for these kinds of reports, I know we put them out kind of not necessarily on the best timing schedule. So if we can start to get into the habit of at the end of legislative session, when the JCR book is out, that's when we can have a collective conversation of what the next year looks like for reporting requirements.
Yeah, it does have its own unique timeline, doesn't it? It's not a fiscal or academic year. It's a 90-day report out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what bills have passed or what could be on the horizon if a bill does pass. If the governor vetoes a bill, then maybe that isn't a reporting requirement. So yeah, it will have to kind of play with it a little bit. But I think this will hopefully centralize the various reporting requirements in a way that we're all on the same page and not living in memo land.
And what we're trying to do with this organization is so people can, in your IR group, your institutional research, plan out their workloads when they know they've got multiple reports due in a short period of time. And also to make sure that all the segmental heads are aware of what the institutions are working on for us. So we're not blindsided by, what do you mean you asked for that and we didn't know about it?
Right.
As you know, some of these reports trigger further legislative inquiries, and we'll keep everybody mutually informed on those too.
Right. I do want to just clarify that this calendar is separate from the kind of standard calendar on all of the quantitative data that we ask campuses on enrollment and degrees and faculty, and that has its own calendar and is a separate kind of process. These are really statutory requirements that are specific, require either narrative or unique data that isn't otherwise collected in those collections. Brad.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. That was part of I was trying to figure this out because most of the reports that we submit to Barbara, for example, SLOR or SOAR, all those things, they're all statutorily required reports as well. But this is a unique cross-section of I guess, recent things that have passed. So will there ever be like those annual reports? I guess some of them, are they sunsetted or is there a reason why they would be included in one and not the other? I'm just trying to get my IR people to potentially be able to look at two different calendars instead of one that you publish.
Yeah, so we've been talking about that. I think we're landing right now that we do need two different calendars because one set of reporting requirements they need to go through that secure portal. It's not necessarily statutorily required, but it is every year. We're not going to change those dates. We need that data for our basic regular analysis and information to our agency. I think the distinction we are trying to make is these reports are required by statute, have a prescriptive nature to them, and often require additional information that isn't otherwise collected in those collections because of the prescriptive nature of what's being required.
Thank you.
Yep. So when we do release this, we'll make it clear in our memo to you all that these are separate, and we'll link to that other calendar that is quantitative and has set deadlines. We're not touching that. That will always be the case. These are kind of unique. Only certain institutions may need to submit specific data depending on what the request is, so on and so forth. So we'll make it clear that we understand that there are two calendars, but for reasons, and try to clarify that. Tony, before we go,
I'd also make it clear that if any of the institutions or any of you see redundancies in these reports, that we can carry back to the legislature to try to amend and shorten and make them more data-driven instead of subjective, like, what do you think was the best program you did? Well, all of them, or we wouldn't have done them. That doesn't work. So, we're trying to look at this because we have to carry the workload also in terms of the compilation and submittal, and then the follow-up that comes from that.
Yeah. Tony, before we go to you, I don't know if Barbara, if you have anything you'd like to add to clarify my comments.
Yeah, I think I can lend some insight that might help with Brad's question. So one is that the calendar that you acknowledged, Brad, I think was originally established, as Emily indicated, the quantitative, really the communication tool between Paris's team and your IR folk. It's morphed into something larger than that, and I think that you're going to see some overlap. So your question about whether they're distinct calendars and you need to drive your IR people to them, no, I think the vast majority of the things that are on that calendar that your IR staff are involved in are on that data web calendar, and we've worked very hard to make that be as comprehensive as possible. So that's one. Two, Paris has no interest in driving a lot of traffic to that secure data web page because it serves one purpose really, which is a communication tool for institutional researchers. We don't put a lot, like, so it's not meant to be a highly trafficked section. You don't see it linked on our regular agency webpage. So again, I think this calendar that Emily's produced is a much more shareable document, and has a fluidity to it that I think, I don't know what the final product will look like, but Paris works very hard to make that calendar be as locked in as possible come fiscal year, and then she doesn't mess with it. If something comes along at the end of a legislative session, she doesn't necessarily go in and edit that. So I think the way to think about it is that the IR one is mostly meant to stay an IR communication tool. And the way that this calendar, your IR folk are going to get a hold of it potentially, is to just say, oh, most of that's on this calendar, but here are these 4 other things that I can highlight. And because it's interactive, maybe they'll sift and sort or reduce it down to, and I know that's a little extra work, but that's sort of the way I think that Paris wants us to think about that IR calendar, is that it's the data collections piece. And this is kind of a lot more. So I hope that helps. And I'm happy to field other questions about ways to think about that.
Tony.
Yes, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Secretary. I just wanted to follow up on, I had the question before the Secretary asked, will we, or at some point in time, can we look at the overlapping nature of the reports? Because some of the data, and I know Barbara knows that some of the data that we're asking and some of the reports are also reported. And then I know some of the data is just for places like iPads that have no relationship. So to try to deal with our institutions, and we leave the IR individuals to Barbara to explain it to, but just to say that we are looking into if there are any overlaps, and if we can bring those reports closer to those dates so that the IR individuals and or other individuals aren't making multiple requests for the same thing at different times, even if it kind of means moving it in alignment with the calendar that Barbara needs, or beginning to prepare our institutions to know that this information you may use to submit to Barbara is going to come down the road shortly for this report. So just looking for some communication from MHAC around that. number one. And also, Emily and Secretary, it would help a lot if there is some statement that this, the second calendar and report is to how you are separating them for reporting purposes, giving some explanation around that. That will help us with you receiving a lot of questions from some institutions when they're not coming through us. That's all.
Sure. So your first comment gives good segue into kind of the next set of comments that I want to share in terms of, and just as Secretary said, kind of thinking about redundancies in our collections and being thoughtful about the collections we do have. So Brad, go ahead before I dive into that.
You know, I promise I'm in my last question, but it's relevant. When we get to JCR, there's a lot of requests for information. It's not always being spearheaded by MHEC, but you're a part of it. So either USM would take the lead, sometimes MAC takes the lead, but you're a part of that. I assume those are not going to be a part of this calendar that you're publishing?
I think we're going to have to I actually think we would include it.
Okay.
I think about particularly like the chronic health condition report. That was a collaborative report between us and Department of Health. So just as you said, like there may be other entities that are taking the lead, but it has to do with higher ed. The other one is the health competencies to make sure that our allied health programs are ensuring that there's cultural competencies and diversity issues within their training. That's spearheaded by Department of Health, but as a collaborative agency, we'll try to help through that process. So I think we'll have to take each one separately. And maybe that's part of the memo to say it's not part of this explicit Excel file, but these are other reports that we're aware of that your campuses should be involved with. And here are the agencies, or here's the liaison to help coordinate that, not through our agency, but through the appropriate entity.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Good morning, Dr. Wilson. I've seen you've joined us. Good morning. Okay, great. Well, one of the things that as a follow-on, we've met with NSA again, and we're able to have a very exhaustive, a very
Secretary Fielder
meeting. Before you go ahead,
I'm so sorry. I have another little blurb that I do want to share with the group before we move into the NSA workforce development or workforce need. If I can, I want to share with the group, again, as Secretary Fielder mentioned, Tony, you mentioned, that we're trying to be thoughtful about our collections, reduce redundancies, making sure we're collecting data that really answers questions, figuring out how we define our elements and our variables in a way that are meaningful. So we have, over the past several years, we've kept Segmental engaged in that process and well informed. Let me give you a couple of examples historically of what we've been doing. So one, clearly pulling MHEC out of the IPEDS reporting process. By doing that, we now have, as an agency, a bit more control in terms of how we define different things. So we're no longer leaning on the federal government. As an agency, we have decided that's okay, because as a state, we may have different interests than what the federal government has when we talk about defining different student activities, how faculty are defined, and institutional descriptives. So that's a big one, is pulling out of the IPEDS reporting requirement has now given us a lot more flexibility in terms of how we define our variables. By virtue of that, we've had a number of internal discussions to think through our data dictionary, our general collections and what they mean, when we talk about them broadly. Certainly Barbara, through the various advisory councils that as segments you invite her to, has been in constant communications with your IR folks, as well as bringing in content experts when appropriate. If we're talking about, so think about the transfer data collection, we're moving forward and trying to think through what that collection is going to look like. So we we have been working on a variety of initiatives. The teacher education is another good example. We've started a new collection that's specific to identifying students who go through a program or a collection of courses that lead to licensure and certification for the purposes of teaching in Maryland. And that's a brand new collection. We've started a non-credit collection, really from a grassroots efforts from the community colleges, and have engaged the 4 years to say you're welcome to participate if you're interested. And we'll start to expand that non-credit collection with some funding from Department of Labor. So we're working on a number of initiatives around these collections and working to be thoughtful. What I want to communicate explicitly to you all is we are working again with your IR staff, and we're working with content experts where appropriate to make sure we're doing this in a thoughtful way. We're going to continue on this endeavor, and we'll continue to keep you all posted as we think about our collections. And I want to assure you that we will engage the Segmental Advisory Council when appropriate when we are doing broad stroke changes. So for example, when we talked about students with advanced standing, we created a whole new regulatory definition for first-time students with advanced standing. This category identifies students who are recent high school graduates that have some college credit when they enter as a freshman. So they are both a first-time student and to some extent a transfer student. We've thought about doing a new flag in our data collections to say, are these students? But we have since pulled back because we think we can do that using our existing elements in a way that works. So we've said, you know what, we don't need to burden the institutions with trying to figure this out. We think we can leverage MLDS to do this. So that's one example of how we've been thoughtful in trying to think through how we identify students, how we collect data. So this is all just information really to share with you, give you some assurance that as we're engaging in these changes, one, be aware that there are forthcoming changes that we're thinking about. We're talking with your IR staff, we're talking with content experts on your campuses to get their input and their feedback. We expect additional changes as we move forward. We will engage Segmental as necessary so that you're informed on these changes. But know that there's kind of a larger discussion that's happening to really streamline our collections, make sure that they are doing what we want them to do, and in some ways really removing the burden. I'll give one final example. As you may know, we have a large collection on financial aid data. And this is after the books have closed on the campuses. So it's usually a year and a half after awards have been made. And it gives us an insight in terms of scholarships that have been awarded, institutional aid, a whole bunch of information. We are now trying to see how we can square that with MD-CAPS data. As you know, Donna's shop uses a tool called MD-CAPS to award scholarships. It would be very interesting and kind of nuanced information if we could look at things like waitlisting and better understand students who start an application but don't finish. Do they end up going to school? What does their financial aid look like? So we're trying to think through how we square those collections in a way that can help inform state policy, can help inform institutional policy, and we can work through informational pieces that can make financial aid processes better. The last thing I'll add is Barbara has been able to hire some phenomenal staff in the past 6 to 9 months and is working on a number of initiatives around informative pieces. We will start taking a much more active approach in doing literature reviews and synthesizing existing research in a way that's meaningful to Maryland and meaningful and purposeful to the issues that are relevant to Maryland. So these are not intended to be they're not think tank pieces. They're not lobbyist pieces. These are very practical to say, here's what we know about the literature. Here's what this could mean for our community colleges in Maryland. This is what it could mean for our transfer students. So I'm not, I don't want to put the pressure on Dr. Schmertz and her staff, but she has some exciting proposals. And so again, trying to square kind of what we know in the scholarly literature with the data we collect, and kind of putting that all together. So a lot of exciting things are happening. I wanted to just reassure you that we'll engage segment, but also recognize we're not 100% engaging you all, because we're really going to the content experts and your IR staff. I'll stop talking. Brad, please.
No, I think this sounds fascinating, especially with the policy issues and doing literature reviews. I'm just curious as to, Barbara, how are you defining these policy issues that you're taking a deeper dive in and reading the literature to figure out what and how this relates to Maryland?
Without taking
Loaded question.
Sure, right. Without taking too much time from the rest of the agenda, in short, Emily's correct. We have had the opportunity to bring on a couple new staff members. One of them just started in December. So part of this process is really in its infancy, but my associate director colleague, Yu-Shin Lin, has basically become a mini scholar in some of the most pressing legislation that has passed. So she's used the cross-section of recent legislation, testimony from hearings, things either MHEC or other segments have had to respond to, knowing that those are really inner workings of questions that legislators may have, or perspectives that legislators may have that we might be able to lend some guidance on. And we're also had a lovely opportunity to start working with some of our other SHIOs across the country who have had more practice at advancing this kind of work and are similarly situated as coordinating bodies and similarly staffed and similarly structured to say, okay, well, how are you doing this, and how are you doing this amidst to others' remarks, all this other sort of mandated work that we have that we try to generate as well. So so I think the short answer is stay tuned, but we're being very thoughtful. You know, Yu-Shin comes from CCRC. She comes from she knows that we're not an advocacy organization. She's very good with the data, and so I think that's going to be a compliment. I think our first big tackle is going to be around some best practices on transfer. That seems like a uniform and unilaterally topic of interest for Marylanders. I would love to I hope we can reutilize data advisory group in this manner, but I think we want to try to get our feet under us before we go. We don't want to come to you and I'll ask, what should we write on? We want to say, these are our 4 key topics. What do people have to say about that? So, so stay tuned for more on that.
Thank you.
Okay, I am done on that front. Barbara, is there anything else that you would add in my comments as clarifying?
No, I think you covered it all. I think that you're correct that the segmental leaders will be brought in as we make key steps, and those conversations right now are rather internal. So even as you go back to your IR colleagues, know that we're not necessarily anticipating engaging with them until we've really had some more internal conversations, both with Emily and others, about what direction we want to take. So we don't want to make anybody nervous, but I think Emily's tenor of it's going to be good, it's exciting, and it's thoughtful is kind of the key thing I would want to emphasize.
And we're working closely with MLDS as well. We know that they are a key partner in all of this. So Ann Kellogg being our liaison between MHEC data and MLDS usage. She's been part of this from the get-go because we want to make sure we're handing off meaningful and that they're able to do meaningful analyses as well. So, okay, I will stop there, Secretary Fielder. Thank you.
Okay, good. I think we've covered that very well. I think that, you know, adding that MLDS is involved, and we start looking at the very broad and total amount of data that gets collected and reports from institutions, and how do we best use it? What's the point of collecting all this if it's not going to be useful, you know, to review what we're doing and where we should be headed? So with part of that We had a follow-up meeting with the NSA, Emily and Trish and myself, and it ended up being 3 hours or so. So it was an excellent discussion about workforce needs, because we asked the question, what does NSA need now and in 5 and 10 years? So with that, Emily, you want to share the information? And we did have agreement from them to share the information. So
Yes. So just as Secretary Fielder said, we met with the NSA. One of the handouts they gave us that, as Secretary Fielder says, is unclassified. You can see from the top what NSA is looking for in the next 5 to 7 years. And really, I think the first one is language analysis. They've spent a lot of time talking about really needing individuals to speak at least another language, if not multiple. And you see on the screen, Chinese, Russian, Farsi, Korean, world cultures, understanding how languages work. So language analysis, intelligence analysis, data science, computer science, cybersecurity, business and human capital. Another one that they spent a bit of time talking about, industrial and organizational psychology, and things like technical management. So we will, of course, share this with you. I think the question that I have for the group, I'll share this with you, and certainly within the next day or two. We were thinking we just put this out as a memo, again, give a little bit of context that our agency, Secretary Fielder, myself, and Trish met with NSA officials. Here's what there's a workforce need. I don't think that this merits new programs. I think we have plenty of these programs. The request really is getting students to major in these programs and educating them that there are jobs at NSA. Granted, they have to pass security tests, they have to pass background tests, and to some extent, drug tests. But how do we get students interested in these pipelines for the specific purposes of employment at NSA? So that's the directive, and that would be the intent of the memo, is to not say we need new programs, but we need to funnel students into these programs to serve NSA needs. Dr. Coleman and then President Wilson.
Well, Emily, thank you very much, because we have been looking at that NSA needs in the system and how we find out what programs, not only just in the system, but across the whole higher education environment in Maryland that we do. One of the things I would like and see if it's possible for MHEC to have NSA to become more actively involved with our campuses. And just like we recruit for students, well, they need to come and talk to, and we can set up uniform series of events, because students do major in those various, computer science, of course, cyber. We're busting, all of us are busting at the seams at the AA level and the BS, master's, and doctoral level with students in these areas, and we're continuing to recruit them. But what they say to us when we talk to the students is that they have difficulty getting into NSA, and they do not have difficult backgrounds. They have good backgrounds. So we need a lot more openness from NSA so that students know that that pipeline is available to them across the higher education environment in Maryland. And because they're right next door to all of us.
That's really helpful feedback. We've made good connections. So we can certainly take that back and see how we can coordinate more targeted initiatives on the campuses themselves, and offer that up to segments for you, so that we can, try to align all that. Secretary Fielder.
Yeah. A couple other things that was covered by multiple speakers was the fact that they really prefer native, so they're looking at individuals that are U.S. citizens that have no drug-related problems, credit problems, financial problems, legal problems. So they do a very exhaustive research, and one of the speakers indicated that they even could be at the junior high level to try to start to the recruitment and the feeder pathway so that students realize that NSA would like to recruit from Maryland, not just out of state, because when they recruit it from out of state, they're likely to lose that person after a few years of training. So what we want to do is broaden and strengthen that conduit we hope we were trying to establish here, and get your feedback in terms of, you know, whether there's needs to be some sponsorship or something different than our current approach, which has been, you know, almost individual students going after an individual institutions. Because we have a tremendous student body here in higher ed. It's just a matter of getting up their flagpole a little bit higher, so they're recruiting here versus where they're recruiting from.
President Wilson.
Yeah, Emily, thanks for providing the information with regard to the staffing needs of NSA. Really, we have a deep partnership with NSA. They are funding, of course, laboratory here on campus. They have a great relationship with our Center for the Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and much as you and Secretary Fielder went down to meet with them, they invited me and my Vice President for Research and the Director of the Center for IoT cybersecurity down last semester. They gave us an incredible tour of the facility, explored with us all of these needs, if you will, and then they were very interested in Morgan, of course, because of the diversity of our student population and the diversity of the graduates. If you had gone on that website, I believe about 3 months ago, one of the initiatives that they funded here or coming out of that laboratory was the feature of the NSA website. And the title of it was, in essence, this is what the future of cybersecurity looks like. And it took you behind the project that they were funding. I guess this is just a way of saying that I think this is really spot on. I believe someone said we have to figure out a way in which they can understand a bit more about what is happening on the campuses, and certainly getting them out to the campuses, I think, is a wonderful, wonderful idea. And so we are just in deep discussions with them now about strengthening that partnership. I can't go into too much detail, but if we move in the direction that we're going, it would be one of the unique partnerships, not only in our state, but in the nation with them. And we'll keep you informed as we go along.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Wilson. Brad.
Yeah, thank you for giving us this report. I would just like to say that, you know, those are high competitive jobs, not just for the NSA, computer science, cybersecurity. I mean, the finance pays well. I think from a position of the NSA and how they can partner with us a little better is look at apprenticeship opportunities, not your typical sort of, you know, get your degree, come work for us. Literally take more note and focus in on entry-level positions and growing them in stackable type credentials all the way, growing that homegrown talent that you're talking about, Secretary Fielder from Maryland, and getting them in levels of position, getting their security clearance, but working directly with the college and helping that pipeline. I think they're doing some of that at a small scale, but they really need to jump in, and if they need this workforce, help out do it.
Yeah, they talked a little bit about some of their summer programs. They do have, 12-week intensive internship for both high schoolers and for college students. So you're right, there are programs. It does seem like, as President Wilson mentioned, there are some targeted initiatives at specific campuses. But thinking outside the box in terms of workforce need is helpful feedback. We will take it back to them. Sarah.
So I just wanted to mention, because I don't want to everyone to think that the NSA is, I just want everyone to have realistic expectations here. We had a program for many years with the NSA. It's a small scale scholarship program for students who applied, and there was a system of partnerships with some of the tech companies in the state, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and students, the NSA partner with us to provide the clearance. And the students, to your point, Secretary Fielder, had to not have any interactions with drugs. Cryptocurrency is also a weird thing where you can't get clearance if you've been involved in cryptocurrency, and a whole bunch of other requirements that we started training our students on in their freshman years, and by their junior years, they were usually ready for this. And so this year it's going into, I think it's 22nd year, and we set up the campus presentations and we had students start thinking about their applications. And on September 1st, NSA let us know that the program was going to stop. It was not going to continue, and effective immediately. And so I have a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, and I know they're the NSA and they're probably listening to this call and every other call I make forevermore. But there's a long trail, and we got Congressman Ruppersberger's office involved, and it came down to a resources issue. They said, we just don't have the resources to foot the bill for these clearance processes. So I just want everyone to be realistic about it. I know that you're all saying that it's competitive and that you know that, but I think it would be naive for us to think that there's going to be any kind of financial resources, with the exception of your program, Dr. Wilson. I hope that they don't do something like this to you, but I would just say be cautious. That would be my 2 cents.
Sarah, in light of your comment, I shall mute myself.
Yes. My expectation was not that there was, a financial wherewithal with this, but I see this as more of a willingness for NSA to share data that they wouldn't 5 years ago when I met with them. When we met with them, it was like, these are the things that we need that we can help with. And I see that whether it's a different team or whatever, more of an approach. And I think that it's something to me that I want to welcome and possibly encourage one of their speakers to join us at a segmental meeting, and then also do that for MSDE board, which I can't speak on behalf of, but I certainly would encourage them to do that. So again, it's a broader approach, but we wanted to make sure that each of you were aware of this.
So in summary, expect a memo in the next day or two. I just didn't want to send this memo out without some context and some background. It will just be, we met with NSA. They would like to increase the pipeline. This is not a request for more programs. This is really encouraging students to know that these programs can lead to potential jobs at NSA. So, Secretary, can I segue into the next one?
Yeah, let's go ahead. It's all more workforce related needs. Yes.
Yep. Exactly. So as you may know, our lovely colleague, Dr. Cliff Mitchell, over at the Maryland Department of Health, approached me right around the Thanksgiving holiday and said that he had a non-COVID related issue and wanted to talk about yet another workforce need, environmental health specialists. These are highly skilled individuals that, as you can probably imagine in our conversations with Dr. Mitchell, are unique to health departments, both local and statewide, and to some extent nationally. President Wilson, do you have a question before I share my screen? No. Okay. So let me share my screen once again. Let me also preface, this will come out as a memo. This, I'm not quite sure what we do with this information. And so let me walk you through what we know, what we have, and get your feedback on this. So just bear with me. I'm just kind of read through this. Environmental Health Specialist series is regulated by the Board of Environmental Health Specialists. That is a Maryland-specific board. The minimum education and experience requirements is a bachelor's degree in any major with 30 credit hours in physical, biological, or environmental sciences, at least one lab course in two of the following: chemistry, physics, biology, soil science, geographic information systems, and of course, a course in mathematics. So broad range of training, but certainly heavy in the STEM and science fields. An applicant can also qualify for examination with these other combinations, such as a master's degree in public health, and 3 months in internship approved by the board, or a bachelor's degree in the physical biological sciences that includes at least 60 hours. The experience requirement for an applicant with this education background is 12 months of experience in practice as an environmental health specialist. So as I understand it, a student would get essentially a conditional approval to be hired as an environmental health specialist. They do 12 months of experience, they get a good review from their supervisor, and then they're able to qualify for the licensure. So as long as they meet those educational requirements, they can go ahead and start working in the field with this kind of conditional approval. And then they need to have this kind of supervised experience to fully qualify as a environmental health specialist. As of early December 2021, there are approximately 280 to 300 positions within state government for these individuals. The largest contingent is in local health departments, followed by the Maryland Department of Health Environmental Health Bureau, about 40 positions, the Office of Health Care Quality, 10, and Maryland Department of the Environment, less than 10. The clincher in all of this is there's about a 40% vacancy rate in these positions statewide. So that's kind of the issue that it sounds like Department of Health is struggling with. There is a certification exam. If you go on these websites, you'll see the exam qualifiers. I did do a quick look in our academic program inventory. There is a particular zip code that matches to training, but as you can tell from the education requirements, really anybody who's an undergrad bio major or a general science major could easily meet those requirements. But nonetheless, these specific zip codes, and these are degree completers in these programs. And so we really only have masters and PBCs, post-baccalaureate certificates, with this particular zip code. We are graduating students. We have not done the analysis to see where these students are going, if they are in fact staying in the state, are they working for state government. I can work with MLDS to do that analysis, but I don't know if that would be helpful. So let me stop sharing go back to you all. What do we do with this information? How do you think we should proceed? Clearly, we don't have any specific health environmental science majors at the undergrad level, at the bachelor's level, but that could easily be done. So I don't know if that's a way we go. What would you all need in a memo to help? What do we do with this? President Wilson, you did have your hand up, but you put it down. I want to make sure you get an opportunity to speak.
I'm going to actually have the others go before me. My comment, it's a little related to perhaps the legislature and putting these two topics together, but others may have a comment directly related to what you just shared.
Sure. Okay. Dr. Coleman.
I don't know whether I'm going to piggyback on anything Dr. Wilson might say, but, you know, Emily, this is a broader issue. When we have these workforce needs and we are asked to produce students, which, you know, many of us have programs. And again, looking at the zip codes doesn't reflect all of the programs that could necessarily fall into the category that would be environmental health specialists. But can we also, while we try to boost this workforce, look at the issue around what programs are workforce need programs that duplication may get in the way of us producing students, particularly at the undergraduate level? You know, there are specific core courses that in environmental science, you know, we have the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences, and we just had a discussion this weekend on a lot of the things that Dr. Mitchell has brought up and about us producing these. One of the things that we are concerned about is if we start drilling down to the baccalaureate level and we produce these various degrees, there are core courses that all of us have to offer to meet some of the standard areas that would qualify these students to eventually to become licensed, whether we're looking at just simply our STEM programs and also some of our other programs. So like we have common, like all of the universities offer some very basic similar programs. How do we not get into that area when we're talking about boosting workforce needs? As you see, there are a number of PBCs that Johns Hopkins offers, but there are also a number of PBCs that I know the system institutions had to sidestep, which may not fall into those zip codes without duplicating Johns Hopkins, and even with between College Park and Global Campus. So that's the question. I mean, we have faculty ready, eager to create pipelines with the community colleges to look at environmental health issues, but we're also hamstrung a bit with how far we can do these programs, and these programs not act like English or history or those that all of us have. So that's my question, because I have 10, I can tell you, I have 10 proposals that I've reviewed, and I've already found duplication with some of our other undergraduate programs at other institutions within and outside of USM.
Right. I totally hear you. And that's why I'm hesitating to some degree of how to frame this memo. Because, you know, we have a state agency saying we need people to apply for our jobs. I don't see this necessarily as needing new programs because the particularly undergraduate requirements are so broad. Is it that we need to collaborate with Department of Health on that? But and I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Coleman. This speaks to a larger issue. I think I was very grateful that Dr. Mitchell gave us the data that he did, because I hear this from MSDE. I hear it from all sorts of other agencies. So I was on a call with MSDE. They are in dire need of, they are seeing retirement rates out the wazoo for particularly school psychologists and school nurses. Okay, it's not that we need new programs, but how do we get students funneled through those programs because there's a workforce need? And I don't know how we do that as an agency and communicate that while also balancing program duplication. If there is a school institution that wants to create a program or adjust a current program in a way that I don't know how we do that. So I'm coming to you all with kind of an open mind on how we frame this in a way that meets a statewide workforce need, benefits our institutions without having everybody step on each other's toes and create competition that's unhealthy. Dr. Phillips, and then we'll go over to President Wilson.
Well, you can imagine what I might have to say, but I have a feeling that President Wilson might be wanting to address some of the conversation that we're talking about now. You can come back to me.
President Wilson.
Yes. So I'm sort of looking at this as a broader issue, a much broader issue. And let me kind of frame a couple of questions first, Emily. Does MHEC really want to be in the business of sending to the campuses every single individual request you might get? I don't think that is sustainable, right? However, as I kind of look at another space in which I operate in nationally, where I'm looking at the future of work and the work of the future for the nation, is there an opportunity for MHEC to basically, going into the legislative session, if not this year, certainly next year, to kind of put this question before higher ed in Maryland, which is, how are you thinking about the future of work and the work of the future? And then what kind of curricular alignments are taking place to reflect that, so that as we churn out the graduates, we are churning them out, so to speak, with this kind of realignment in mind. If I'm trying to anticipate as the legislative session opens, Secretary Fielder, normally they might put 2 or 3 topics on the table for quote unquote of the segmental heads to opine on. And I'm going, what is it this year beyond perhaps DEI, right? And this may be one of them, which is how your campus is thinking about that work of the future of work, because there are so many spaces where we are seeing a misalignment. I mean, the needs are great. The universities are not producing those graduates in any way, form, or fashion. And it would be great if we could come at this collectively as opposed to being episodic. Now, I'll send this article to you because it was kind of shocking for me. So once again, staying in the same space, each year a report is produced on the number of doctoral degrees, for example, that are being awarded across all of American higher ed. And this time I paid a little more attention to it. I couldn't believe the number of areas in all of American higher education last year that offered 0 doctorates to a Black person. It was so alarming when you look at it. Was a laundry list of these areas, right? So when you get into this whole question of workforce needs, there's so much granularity that you really have to kind of untangle this with. Otherwise, I don't think we could take it very far. So I understand what Dr. Coleman is saying. I'm just sort of kind of taking this now to a larger discussion piece. And if so, depending on how that might land or where that might land, who knows? And I'm not promoting Secretary Fielder any more bureaucracy, so to speak, within MHAC, but maybe there's a unit within MHAC on workforce needs and producing some kind of annual or biannual report to higher ed, saying, okay, so here are the needs, and how are you guys actually preparing to do that? And in some ways, I kind of like that, because you get these new academic degree programs that are more than just coming from the minds of faculty members. They are now being attached to something that we as a state have said, this is really where we find a tremendous gap between what you are producing and what we need. And therefore, I think you'll get some real spot on proposals from us. Otherwise, they're going to be proposals that, and quite with all due respect to all of our brilliant faculty members, they're going to be reflective of the research interests of the faculty. And then they're going to try and make the case based on whatever little criteria we put together, but oftentimes that may or may not serve this kind of wider workforce need. So I've said too much.
Okay, well, I appreciate both of the questions and part of the answer you just provided. I think a couple of years ago, one of the big conversations in higher education across the United States was the concern about commoditization of higher ed, that institutions were starting to say, we're going to produce this degree because it leads to this career, to this, to this, to this. And then the pushback was on the need for the core gen ed requirement of the whole person being educated. And I think what's happened is we've seen it during the pandemic, the magnification of our frailties. We know that we're not doing enough for that whole person type of approach. We even just have to look at our gen ed requirements and saying, well, how come computer isn't required across the board? However you want to define it, information, cyber, all those things. So I think there is a need of looking at higher ed. Where does it need to be going? Not reacting to what's needed, but trying to say, where do we need to be? And then looking for not just academic programs, but the whole mission of where are we trying to go? And I think it's up to higher ed to have that leadership role. Otherwise, we are simply reacting to what a company needs for a new widget or new program or new whatever. So there is the need for further conversation on this. It's not a quick one and done.
Helpful
Hey, Brad, I
feedback.
saw you had your hand up there. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I have thoughts about all of the things that we've just discussed too, as we have always been teetering back and forth between sort of a liberal education model versus a workforce development model for higher education. And I think you can do both, but you certainly can't do both when I looked at your criteria, Emily, and there's not even an associate's degree mentioned. It's automatically a bachelor's, but yet all you have to have is basically 30 credits in anything science? Like, what's the specificity of a bachelor's degree? We're not even at the game. Being able to, you're taking half the students in Maryland off the table right off the bat. So how are you ever going to get to address the workforce needs unless you're, not really thinking about this in a way that really utilizes your community college and our connections with our community, and being able to provide these sort of workforce degrees that will help, Dr. Mitchell or whatever it may be in all of these areas. But you have to kind of check your own assumptions as well, is what I guess I'm saying.
Great feedback. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Wilson was saying. And I'm wondering if the program approval study that's going on that NCHEMS and that DLS is working on could include an analysis of programs that lead directly to workforce need. And I don't know how that should be defined, but as we're all talking, I'm getting this feeling the sinking feeling that we would set policy and then find out 5 years from now that we did it wrong. And I'm only speaking for me. I would be nervous to vote for anything because I do not have the expertise to vote for it. So I just wonder if we're in a very real current time right now where the program approval process is being looked at, hopefully in excruciating detail, and it might be really instructive to have a third party, external, reputable organization make some recommendations that we can then either take or leave, but maybe they can do some of the work on this rather than relying on you, Emily. And I know your staff needs are not up to doing this kind of in-depth research. So I don't know how the rest of the group would feel about that. And I don't know what the process is for adding to the scope or if this is adding, but I just wanted to mention it because I think it's an opportunity that we might not want to miss.
Sarah, it's certainly a good thought. I don't think that we can amend the RFP or the consultant's contract. That's simply DLS responsibility. And their RFP was dictated by the legislative language. So it's a good thought when we have the opportunity to discuss, which we've not had anybody in GYMS reach out yet. So we're trying to find out, okay, what are their specific steps and when will it occur? So we're trying to get a calendar in place of, what are the expectations in terms of data needs, meetings, and so forth. So as soon as we have any of that, we'll pass that forward also.
Yeah, my thinking was that maybe this isn't an expansion of scope, but more of a refinement of scope. If they're looking at the program approval process, I mean, my thinking was I would not want anything to be established that then ran afoul of our responsibilities to our HBCUs. And so that would be something that I would think this group is specifically looking at. And if we walked down a path, we as the segments, we as MHEC, we as higher ed in Maryland, where we decided this, and it was after the study had come out, it just seems like it would be a little tone deaf to what the study was actually supposed to explore.
Well, I think that what the study is supposed to explore is the existing process. I don't think it's, what are the academic needs within our culture? That would be something that I didn't read into their RFP, if that's what you're asking.
No, I'm not saying that the study should establish the workforce needs. I'm saying that the study should look at if we were to change the process in a way that allowed for a different process for workforce needs, which is exactly what we're talking about here. But I'm not, whatever you think, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
President Wilson.
Yeah, actually, just a quick question. To your knowledge, has MHEC ever proffered on its own a call for proposals to start any new academic degree program in Maryland?
To my knowledge, no. And we, as an example, one of the questions I asked right up front years ago and have asked fairly recently, can MHEC direct? The answer is no. You know, an institution to start a program. Another thought was, can we have an innovative fund? You know, that you put an RFP out, like needing artificial intelligence or some of the further reaching new programs that we're starting to see, and have funds available for that. And that has not moved forward either. So those are ideas that could bear fruit.
Yeah, because back to Sarah's question, just I think this really is worthy of a wider discussion, because I do know that the consultant, of course, is not looking at what we're talking about. But with the workforce piece, how does higher ed collectively in Maryland, how do we process that? And what will be the role of MHEC in this review process? Because it seems like, if one of the functions of MHEC is to kind of get a sense of what where the gaps are, and then you then say, and we need to produce 10,000 more graduates in these fields, then is there a mechanism there for MHEC to call for proposals across all of the sectors of higher ed? And then you're going to have in place an ironclad process as to then who you approve and who you don't approve. And so this is bleeding back into the point that Sarah was making. Yeah, the consultant is going to be looking at program duplication, blah, blah, blah. But if you got to a point, you know, where you were being very serious about filling the gaps, the workforce preparation gaps, then, and they're just going to rely upon the institutions to send forth proposals to do that, I might say, and Sarah, no disregard for our incredible institution, Johns Hopkins, which Ron Daniels and I are very close. But I mean, it'll fall back on who has the billions of dollars, who has the resources to do that, right?
Right.
And if the decision is always going to be made just based on who has more money in the coffers, then is that really going to respond to the needs when you may have more needs around diversity? You may have more needs around particular fields. You have more needs around these different areas. So I just think this is a very timely discussion. And quite frankly, I'm not offering any suggestions as to where to take it next. It's just that additional discussion around this is critical, because otherwise I don't know where that process will land in a couple of years with regard to academic degree program approval.
Thank you. One of the limited tools, as each of you know already, is our workforce scholarships. So when there's a shortage of teachers, then the teaching scholarships with the matching full scholarship ride happens. The nurses the same way. Cybersecurity, cyber warrior, those things are added through scholarship programs, which are very limited. You know, they're not tens of millions of dollars. They're $1 million or $160,000 for cybersecurity, which is a drop in a bucket. I mean, so you're correct. There's a need here to try to identify where are we going to be at some point in the future. And I think that's what every higher ed group in the United States is struggling with. And so are the institutions, because enrollment challenges and commitments and expenses for COVID are real. So where do you go? You know, we're seeing lots of title requests and modifications of academic programs as institutions try to move to make themselves more attractive in the market. Is that sufficient? No, I don't think it is. So it warrants more discussion, yes.
So to kind of bring this has been very helpful discussion, it's helpful for me. So thank you for your comments and feedback. For the immediate issue around both NSA and environmental health specialists, what I think the best path forward is just to say very factually, these entities have reached out. These are needs for them. No need for new programs, particularly with the wide demand for the environmental health specialists. Really anybody in those science fields could qualify for those positions. And an encouragement to segmental leaders to encourage institutions to inform students, encourage students of these workforce opportunities upon graduation. So I think that's how we'll frame these immediate memos so that we do get the information out to campuses so that students are aware and we do our due diligence on that front. But I hear you all saying we do need to have a broader conversation and maybe a kind of a self-reflection on MHEC's role around either identifying workforce needs, doing a gap analysis, how that plays into program review, what should MHEC be doing to evaluate capacity throughout the state to meet particularly statewide and local needs. So it sounds like that's the path forward. So I've taken notes on all of this. Brad, did you had something else to add?
Yeah,
And I will go back on your point to Dr. Mitchell and note the lacking of associates, a recognition of the associate's degree. So I will make sure that we do some advocacy, for lack of a better word, on behalf of the community colleges, because they would fit right there. Like you said, it's 30 credits for that minimum requirement. So an associate's degree could get them into an entry-level position.
Great. No, that's what I was going to say, as well as reach back out to the NSA to have a sort of credit apprenticeship opportunities for entry-level positions at the NSA. Thank
Absolutely. You. Yep. And with NSA, figuring out how to get them to present formally to Segment so that you guys can all have immediate access to that same contact, and how you can coordinate initiatives directly on the campuses. Okay. Thank you very much. More on workforce need. We'll think about that internally and think on what that means for this consultant review. And so stay tuned for more on that front. Secretary Fielder, I'm done.
Okay. Anyone else have any other topics they'd like to raise for this conversation? Our next meeting is in March the 15th, I believe it is. Sarah?
Before we jump off, I just wanted to make a quick comment about the teacher preparation regs that are going through. I just wanted to really thank you, Mr. Secretary and Emily. I know that you connected with our deans and directors of our education programs. There's some concerns specifically around the length of time that the teacher interns are expected to be in the classroom. And also, we've recently realized that there's also some confusion regarding the difference between program completion and graduation from our institutions. So I wanted all the segments to be aware of that in case it hadn't percolated up to you at your level, but we're working on it, we're handling it, and just thanks to MHEC and to my other colleagues. Dear deans and directors have been great to work with.
Thank you, and if you would make sure that we are copied on any of those, that would be helpful. I know Emily and I have had internal discussions about the 180-day requirement for that workload. How do you take a senior and student and say, okay, you need to work for 6 months without pay? And we do know in the conversations last spring that with federal government, we did get the ability to use some of the, it wasn't called work. Let me think what it was called.
Work study funds.
Yeah, the work study funds to be used, but I don't think that would work across the board for every student in Maryland. So I think that for me, that's a real concern. What is that fair to the student? I mean, all those kinds of questions.
Well, we appreciate that so much. And if you wanted to communicate with MSD about that, we would be even further appreciative. So thank you.
Yes, we will. And I think Emily's already talked to Sarah's replacement on that subject. Dr. Wilson.
Some of you may know that we have been really focused over the last decade here at Morgan on elevating the research standing of the institution. And so in that connection, we have elevated our research classification from R3, moderate research, to R2, high research. And the Carnegie Commission actually validated that again last month. So we were able to maintain the R2 high research status. And there are three institutions in Maryland with that destination. It's Morgan, UMBC, and the University of Maryland University of Maryland at Eastern Shore. There are only two institutions in our state with R1 ranking, which is very high research intensive institutions. And our board of regents, after we have come through a very intensive process over the last year and a half, unanimously approved our next 10-year plan here at Morgan, Transformation Morgan 2030. And we have our eyes now set on becoming the third institution in the state of Maryland to have R1 very high research status, focus on the urban condition, marginalized communities, and what COVID-19 has shown us in terms of so much inequity around research that actually can help us to address some of these problems. And so just wanted to put that out there, Secretary Fielder, and certainly this might be a topic in the legislature coming up in terms of supporting this. We have heard from the governor on down. Everyone is very excited. If MX sees an opportunity to support this ascendancy on the part of Morgan, we certainly would appreciate it.
Thank you and congratulations on that. And that couples with the congratulations that are due you for being named the Afro Person of the Year. That's outstanding. I'm not sure that comes with a tremendous stipend like some of the other awards, but hopefully it did for you. Yes.
More work.
More work. Well, if you can handle it, that's a good thing. You just put bigger sideboards on that wagon. But congratulations on both those achievements. Do we have anything else for the good of the cause?
I believe Dr. Coleman has her hand raised.
Thank you. Congratulations, Morgan, on your ascendancy. The USM, I think we've talked about this before, but USM is very involved through UMCs with the sustainable environment, and will be taking the lead this legislative session on talking across all segments about what we can do about sustaining the environment. We've had a number of students at our different institutions who are really pro sustaining the environment, and they will be reaching out across segments to other students to see how we can take students can take a larger role in what they can do to support educationally, everyone being on board with what we need to do to help protect our environment. So just wanted you to know that you'll see a lot from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences around sustaining the environment. And there's no money attached to it, but it is a large push in talking to our various delegates and senators about that. And on a lesser macro level I just wanted to give the segments an update on ArtsIS, since that is a platform that covers all of our segments. We are looking at closing the loop on getting ArtsIS live in its test stages in March with our institutions. We're working with 35 institutions across the higher ed system in Maryland, and we're proud to say that. We also have another private institution who's knocking at our door to become a part of ArtsIS. Also, we're opening the door for institutions to also add special features that they would like. We're using a vendor, as you're aware of, Quotely. So some institutions say we would like to do this with out-of-state community colleges or partner with out-of-state institutions on different things. So those discussions are available, but we're hoping to be beta live on the campuses by March. And I thank everyone who supported the ARCIS project. It's been interesting lift. And so thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Brad, you had your hand up there.
Yes, I'll be very fast. But yes, thank you, Tony, for all that back end work. I know that's a heavy lift. So glad to hear it's going to be up and running in beta by March. My announcements, we have a new president starting today at Howard Community College, Dr. Daria Willis. She's beginning right in time to jump into the legislative session. Good for her. And we have a new president that's been announced for Montgomery College, Dr. Jermaine Williams. Jermaine Williams, yes, and he'll be starting sometime this winter. And Charlene Dukes will be staying on for a while to kind of help him and navigate that process since it's mid-academic year. But that's it. That's all I have.
Well, thank you. As we start this new calendar year, the continuation of COVID year, it's hopefully we're moving beyond that for each of you. And I just really can't express enough how much I appreciate your leadership with your various segments in a coordinated manner that has helped people feel much more confident about what's going on in Maryland and making sure that we get the vaccinations done, the testing. I mean, all the new vocabulary we've had to learn in the last 24 months has been amazing. And it wouldn't have happened without your leadership. Also, thank you for a very engaging conversation this morning. It's been very good. I look forward to continuing this, and hopefully we have a very positive session for all of us. So with that, we'll see you in a couple months. Call me if anything comes up. Bye-bye now.